Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get started while people are still coming in the room. My name is Pamela Robbins. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a National Child Welfare Advisor with the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. We here at the NCDR team are glad you've joined us. My colleague, Misty Flowers, also with the National Center for Diligent Recruitment, will be co-presenting with me today. We will be joined in the presentation by two child welfare professionals with the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community for our panel discussion. Next slide, please. Today's webinar we recorded and shared on the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. Your questions and interactions throughout today's webinar can be submitted via chat and in the Q&A section. We encourage your participation and hope to have time at the end of the presentation to answer a few of those questions. You will receive a survey after today's webinar. Please complete that survey as your input is valuable to us and helps shape our work. In a few days, you will receive an email containing a link to a recorded version of this webinar, as well as a certificate of attendance. Next slide, please. The National Center for Diligent Recruitment is a service of the U.S. Children's Bureau with a mission to increase the capacity of states, tribes, and territories to collect and analyze data to guide focused recruitment. The center provides on-site technical assistance to support diligent recruitment planning. Next slide, please. The center develops effective models of diligent recruitment based on research, as well as furthering the evidence base of family finding, relative outreach, reunion support, and intensive recruitment and retention services. Next slide, please. The objectives for today's webinar include in identifying the key concepts of diligent recruitment of kinship families, which includes components such as flexible licensing standards and culturally tailored training and support. We will also recognize the positive effects of placement stability and maintaining cultural connections, as these factors contribute to a child's emotional well-being and long-term success in a stable, familiar environment. We will describe family-centered and culturally responsive practices that foster stronger collaboration between caregivers and the child welfare system. Understanding and honoring a family's culture is key to building trust and effective partnerships. Finally, we will describe the important role of ongoing support in identifying and retaining kinship families. Whether through financial assistance, training, or emotional resources, ongoing support ensures kinship families are equipped to provide care that meets the child's needs over time. Next slide, please. Let's begin with why kinship is a focus of diligent recruitment work. Next slide, please. Contained on the next two slides are key takeaways from social science research to support seeking kinship families for children and youth in foster care and adoption. The improved outcomes for youth and children identified include reduced trauma, improved mental health outcomes, fewer behavioral problems, better educational outcomes. Next slide, please. As well as other outcomes, including greater placement stability and higher levels of permanency, better connections to communities of origin, stronger ties to the child's biological family, and greater satisfaction for youth. Next slide, please. Contained on this slide is a list of legislative acts initiated over the past several decades. This progression demonstrates the recognition of and focus on kinship placements as vehicles to improve outcomes for youth and children. Next slide, please. Let's take a brief look at where we stand. With the focus on kinship placements, we have seen a modest increase in placements in kin in the past 2 decades. Adoptions from public child welfare systems are still 1.5 times more likely to be by foster parents than relatives. Black and Native American Alaskan Native children are not only disproportionately represented in the child welfare system, but are frequently placed with foster families outside of their race and culture. These communities have a historical pattern of providing care for extended family, allowing them to pass along their culture, customs, and language. Today, we have an opportunity to look at kinship care from a tribal perspective to understand how the concept of kinship is deeply rooted in the Native American culture. Listen carefully to not only Misty's informational section, but the practical applications that will be shared during the panel discussion. The takeaways from today's webinar can provide strategies for all children and youth in the care of our states, territories, and tribal child welfare systems. I would now like to welcome and pass on to Misty Flowers with the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. Welcome, Misty.
Hi, hello. Ampetu washte. Good morning, good afternoon across Indian country. Ampetu washte chante washte na pechuzapi. Ampo mini boja demie. Na washichu ya Misty Thomas Flowers imakyapiye. Isanti Dakota na klinke ihanktawa na panka hemacha. I say good day to you. I shake your hand with a good heart. I am Misty Flowers. I am a diligent recruitment advisor with the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. I am based out of Nebraska. Since we work from home, I am able to live on my home reservation here in Nebraska. So I'm a member of the Santee Sioux Nation, but I also have Tlingit of Alaska, Yankton Sioux, and Ponca blood. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to be here. I'm happy you all are here with us today. And so we're going to get right into it. And we have limited time today, so we're going to try to get through as much as we possibly can. So we cannot talk about child welfare without acknowledging historical and intergenerational trauma. Next slide, please. So here I have a quote from Chairwoman Irma from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe. And she talks about how we are trying to heal from historical pain, mend broken families, and heal from damage done over years and generations. And I know that all of you that are out there in Indian country, I mean, you know, we have become the experts on trauma because we live it. You know, I know that my family is no different than probably a majority of Native families out there. And usually we're working in it, we live in it, and we're trying to heal from it all at the same time. But you can go to the next slide. So we know that historical and intergenerational trauma pretty much, you know, it creates more trauma and more trauma and more trauma. And really with the child welfare system, we are treating the symptoms of historical and intergenerational trauma. And, you know, without going too far into it, you know, we really want to focus on healing from historical and intergenerational trauma. And so, from an Indigenous psychology perspective, we are in a time of healing from historical and intergenerational trauma. It's a time of cultural revitalization and healing. And one way to help families and youth heal is to help keep them with their tribal communities and among relatives. You can go to the next slide. Some people, you know, we talk about the Indian Child Welfare Act. So we're going to look at how the Indian Child Welfare Act, using diligent recruitment, can help meet the standards of the Indian Child Welfare Act. We're going to take a look at the language directly from the ICWA that was enacted in 1978. Just in case people are not aware, this law has been around for over 40 years, and it was enacted in 1978 to help keep Native children with Native families. After 33% of Native children were being involuntarily removed from their home, and 80% of them at that time were being adopted into white homes. And so, of course, we celebrate ICWA has been upheld by the United States Supreme Court in June of 2023. You can go to the next slide. So this is language that comes directly out of the Indian Child Welfare Act. ICWA talks about the best interest of an Indian child and the stable, satisfactory environment and the desirability of maintaining continuity, permanence as a family unit of the existing and proposed adoptive home. And so, of course, we want to keep families together when possible. Mental and physical health of all individuals involved, and capacity and disposition of the parties to give the child love, affection, guidance, and to continue educating the child in the child's tribal culture and heritage. So this is one of the primary goals behind ICWA, was to help children develop or maintain their cultural identity. So Native American families from the child's tribe are the best that are equipped to do that. So just like Pamela was talking about, with all of the benefits of kinship care, this is something that we have that they were working towards with passing the Indian Child Welfare Act. You can go to the next slide. This is some more in language directly out of the ICWA. ICWA defines placement preferences for Native American children. There are foster care placement standards and adoptive placement standards. So when the permanency objective changes, then the placement needs to be revisited. Family finding would need to be revisited. As the case progresses, if the child is not with relatives or within the child's tribe, we need to be checking back with relatives and or the child's tribe to see if anything has changed and if they're able to take placement. Circumstances change, and so we want to periodically check back with relatives, especially if children are not placed within with relatives or within a kinship placement. Sometimes best interest of a child may prevent placement with relatives if they're geographically separated or maybe across state lines. So when the permanency objective changes to guardianship, tribal customary adoption, or adoption, then family finding will need to be completed again. We've had families that have told us that, they don't want their relative to go into to be adopted, but they may not be able to parent them at this time. So we always want to check back. Meeting placement preferences can also be determined to be active efforts. Active efforts to keep the child or children with relatives is also helping to meet the active effort standards of the Indian Child Welfare Act. You can go to the next slide. So we're going to look at how tribal nations and indigenous people have cultural values and beliefs regarding caring for children that can be utilized in diligent recruitment. All or most of our tribes have values that really embody the true meaning of it takes a village to raise a child. You can go to the next slide. Tribal kinship and clanship systems often guide parental and extended family roles and responsibilities for caring for children. Some tribes have clans and some do not. If a tribe has clans, placement with a clan member most definitely should be considered as kinship placement. Like I said, not all tribes have clans, but there's a good number that do. My tribe does not, but we have what's called tioshbais, or like the large extended family and a very intricate kinship system. So kinship within our tribe translates into we have a lot of relatives. And I know like that's kind of the way it is across Indian country. So just for example, for my tribe, my mother's sisters are like my second moms or mamana, and my dad's brothers are my dad's or my Ishida. So like all of their children become my siblings. They're not just my cousins, they're my siblings. And so, just as an example, and clans have real roles and responsibilities when raising children and teaching children those roles and responsibilities as they grow up. I cannot speak to this, as like I said, my primary tribe, the Santee Sioux Nation, that's what I know and how I was raised. I know my Tlingit tribe, they have clans, but I'm still learning about that because I was raised here in Nebraska. But those clanship systems are very, very important, and I just can't stress that enough, and how important that is. And if we can keep children within that clanship system, they're going to learn those roles and responsibilities that there's only their clan can teach them. Some clans are maternal, some are paternal. So, they might follow mom's side, they might follow dad's side. But for the second half of this slide here, it talks about how hard it is to let the children go back. I know, that was something I would hear all the time, and it was, that it's hard to let the kids go back. So I would always talk about how, no matter what, and our tribes are really small. Chances are we're related somehow, some way, we're connected somehow, some way. And that's only going to strengthen, and we can help, be a continued support for that child and for that family. So I use this example. I have a brother and his wife that are licensed foster parents here on our reservation, and they have taken several children in, and they build relationships, and those relationships continue after the kids go home, and they'll continue to pick them up even after the kids go home, and they'll continue to have visits, and that's just how we are as Native people. Once that connection is there, we're related, we're relatives. So we can go to the next slide. So Indigenous children, and I think all children are human beings in general, have an innate human need to be connected to family and culture. So how can we safely and intentionally foster those connections? When working with Native American families, it can get somewhat confusing because we have lots of grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings. All relatives have responsibilities to ensure that the children learn our way of life, traditions, and even in discipline. So in my tribe, all aunts and uncles had a responsibility to help discipline the children or teach the children, while parents' roles were to love them. But everybody had a responsibility to keep them safe. Some tribes have specific groups that was their role. With the Omaha tribe, they had the Mark of Honor women. In our tribe, we have the Winkta or the Winkte, or the Two Spirit, and they had a responsibility for caring for children that maybe they didn't have parents. There's a lot of things like adoption ceremonies. We can go to the next slide. Here are some suggestions to help with family finding. First and foremost, I think it's really important to hire tribal members that have knowledge of families and who the community members are, the clans, how we're related, how we're connected. That's super important. And those are things that you can't really get from, college classes. But those are really important skills to have when doing family finding. We should be asking during this initial assessment about family and relatives, and continue asking throughout the case. Check back with relatives as the case goes on. And we can go to the next slide. We definitely want to be providing specific kin-specific training to families. There are a lot of programs that are out there. A lot of times we would hear that, well, I know how to parent my relative. But kids that come through foster care have a unique set of needs. Some kids have more needs than others. And so there's a lot of training that's out there to help families to prepare for that, like programs like NTDC, Native American Tips Map. There's also kinship specific programs like Caring for Our Own. But we need to help families navigate crisis and shifting family dynamics. So grandparents or aunts or uncles are coming into that parenting role. And so how do we need to help them with that? And so it's also shifting family dynamics with the biological parents and that relationship. And so that can get strained and that can get difficult. And so we want to help support families through that. We also want to help provide cultural education when possible, with the kids and the parents, the biological parents as well as the foster parents. And there's also kinship specific licensing standards. So the Children's Bureau has recently released guidance on licensing standards and how those may differ from standard licensing. So jurisdictions can have separate kinship licensing standards so that are different than the standard foster care licensing. So, for example, background check requirements may be a little bit different. So we are going to be sending out, and there's my timer. I'm getting close here to the end, but we're going to be sending that out at the end of after with the follow-up email. But you can go to the next slide. I think that was it. Oh, again, talking just about the separate licensing standards, and how we can be, should be, and can be supporting relative and kinship families. We definitely want to take care of those families because they are going to be our #1 recruiters. And one of the rules of thumb that I had always told my staff when I was working in the field was, let's take care of these families because they're the ones that are taking care of our children. So what can we do to help them with that? And so that means helping them with, providing support or whatever resources they might need. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And I turn it back over to Pamela for our panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Misty. Really enjoyed that. We're gonna go, you can go to the next slide, Casey. We're going to move to our panel discussion. Joining Misty will be our guest from the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. Katie Avalos is the Senior Licensing Specialist, and Norma Hernandez is the Licensing Unit Manager. Thank all of you for joining us today and agreeing to share your experiences working with kinship families. We're excited to hear from you. So if you guys want to turn your cameras on, we'll turn that on. Awesome. Okay. Question number 1. Why should tribal and public child welfare agencies prioritize kinship care in diligent recruitment? We'll go to Norma and then Misty.
Well, the reason we're going to take this route is because of what Misty said earlier. We have proof, there's research that demonstrates that kinship placements make an impact on the mental health and the behavioral health of children. And because of this, we want to stay connected. We want those children to stay with family members, their family of origin. They provide a sense of belonging and, more importantly, the identity of the children. And when our children are placed in non-native homes, this is when our children are losing their identity, their cultural practices. So foster care and group homes should always be secondary. They should not be a first choice for placement of our kids. Another reason is that connectedness to their culture when they're with kinship family gives an availability of resources that other important needs that may be felt through the placement with kin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. And to add to all of that and what I said earlier about that development of the strong cultural identity, I think that is one of the things about the Indian Child Welfare Act that, and why they were, really pushing for that. And what we saw as a result of, the historical trauma and intergenerational trauma was the effect on the cultural identity and how important that is. And so without that, it's really detrimental to our children and families. And so keeping kids with kinship care providers, with relatives within their tribe, really helps them to develop that cultural identity. And so, like I said, really trying to help break cycles of historical and intergenerational trauma.
Thank you. Number 2, what are some teachings from your tribe about caring for children that helps guide your work? We'll hear from Katie and then Misty.
Yes, absolutely. So, here in Salt River, the huge kind of guiding principles that we center our work on is first, culturally, Salt River believes in children as the center of community, that all else kind of would ripple out from there. So what we are doing is centered around the children. We also, and it was talked a little bit about earlier, but Salt River does also operate very much on kinship as all relations, that we're very much looking at even our foster care. Foster care is kinship care, even if you are not, you know, biologically related to these children. This is kin, this is community. Salt River also does not operate on a clanship system. That's not something that is part of our culture here in Salt River, but we definitely, as a social service practice, we look at who has established relationships with these children, who are, you know, their auntie moms, who are these close connections, and work our kinship support and recruitment around where those established relationships are. And that final principle we really look at, especially when we're talking about kin as all our relations, is that healing generations backwards and generations forward. So when we're centering our thoughts, and certainly here in licensing on work, what are we doing to heal families, right? If we're looking at foster care as temporary, the goal of reunification, then we're healing backwards, but we're also healing the community forward. And we really try to center our practice around that.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't find my mouse. Thanks, Katie. I really like what you said about the children being the center of the culture. And, you know, that's really, like I was talking about earlier, it's really similar within our tribe. And, you know, there's a lot of teachings that we can take from the animal nations. And one of them is the Buffalo Nation. And, you know, in terms of caring for children. So like with the buffalo, when they are, when there's danger around, they will put the little ones in the middle, the younger baby buffaloes, I guess you could say, and then the cows will go around clockwise and surround them, and then the bulls will walk around on the outside counterclockwise, and they will protect the ones that are, you know, their babies that are in the middle. And that's something that I've always loved. One of the teachings and stories that come from our tribe. And I think it really resonates as well, you know, with Salt River and some of their teachings. But like I was talking about before, you know, we have what we call the Hunka ceremonies, which is adoption. That's something that our people have done for generations and generations, and to take, you know, we've always been taught to take care of our own. We take care of, you know, children, and like I was talking about, aunts, uncles have responsibility, grandparents, like everybody has a responsibility for teaching and caring for our kids and raising them, you know, the best that we can. And but there was also like those that were within our tribe, what nowadays they say two spirit, but long ago they would say winkta or weekday. You know, they had a responsibility for taking care of children that didn't have parents. But I there's so much I can probably go on and talk about this for a while, but I'll turn it back over to Pamela
Thank you.
for the
Thank
next
you, ladies.
question.
Number 3, how has your tribe supported and developed relative kinship foster families? And what have been some of the most significant challenges? We'll go Norma and then Misty. Don't forget to unmute, Norma.
Okay, so here in Salt River, we've done numerous things to strengthen and develop kinship families. We've provided financial supports that exceed standard stateside subsidies. We've made thousands of dollars of home repairs, which include like roofs, windows, doors. We've made provision of household necessities. We've had to purchase stoves, refrigerators, and things like that. We have other areas of support in a team that we have within the department. It's in-home services. And what they do is they prevent escalation of challenges in the home. So our families can come, they can volunteer to go back into the in-home unit for support. We have also intensified services. We put wraparound services around. We have a TDM process, a team decision process, we have a clinician that supports our families in that area as well, so that we can eliminate as many struggles as possible.
You're muted, Misty.
I thought I hit unmute, sorry about that. Thank you, Norma. In addition to all of those things, like, cause our tribe, when I worked for my tribe, we would do a lot of those same things. We would provide additional financial support to families. If they needed bunk beds or dressers or whatever it is that they needed, we would help find those resources for them. Whether they were on reservation or off reservation, because we have a lot of families that live off reservation. Majority of our ICWA cases were in the state of Iowa, and which is like an hour and a half drive from us. But so we regardless of where they were at, if we could keep them with relative or kinship placement in whatever it took. And on that note, as far as financial resources, and like every jurisdiction is different, and the financial support that is provided to relative and kinship care providers, and of course, they need to pass some sort of a background check, but every jurisdiction is different. And so, like, as a tribe, if we had a family that was placed from Iowa versus Nebraska, we kind of had an idea of what they would, what the financial assistance would look like. Some jurisdictions provide the same as a foster care maintenance payment. Some jurisdictions do not. And so just kind of depending on that too, and we would know, but we would always try to help support the family, and providing, we had a private Facebook group for our foster and relative care providers. That was a resource that they had started, that they had wanted. It came after we had done a licensing class, and they would share resources, help support each other. And if, they needed things like clothing or something else for the kids, or maybe they had some clothing that they, or some things that they had for kids that they could give to another family, like, just things like that they could help share with each other. And sometimes it's just about listening, because like I was talking about before, having relative or kinship placement can be difficult, and families are going through transition. And, anytime, families are in transition, it's going to be difficult, changing roles and responsibilities, and with that sometimes family relationships can get strained, because now you have relatives that are now caring for your children. And so, I would always call it like crazy making or chaos making, where they try to disrupt placement. So how can we help support the family through that? How can we help the biological parents through that? Helping to navigate, when can the kids have visitation? Can they have visitation? Things like that, or how to navigate, well, what do we do if we see them in the community? Because they're going to see each other. They're going to see each other in the community. Or how do we help the kids through all of that as well? So just some of the things that we would do.
Thank you. Number 4, can you share any innovative strategies or ideas that have helped your practice with kinship families? So we'll go to Katie and then Misty.
Yeah, I think, here in Salt River, and certainly with our team, you would hope that it wouldn't be an innovative strategy, although I think that it can be, is we really focus on our relationship building with our families. We understand that this may not be the first time they've been in contact. They may be a grandparent who had their own involvement with child welfare, an auntie who maybe had an in-home case at some point. So we center what we do around relationship building, and we understand, yes, there are things that need to be accomplished. There's paperwork that has to be signed. There are background checks that have to be done, but really focus on giving myself enough of time for home visits. If I'm running out to do paperwork, I'm still going to schedule myself that hour. I'm going to make time for questions and conversations. I'm gonna, share as is appropriate, maybe about my own life or work. Like, we build that relationship, which builds that trust. One of the ways we're able to do that, though, is because we do, here in Salt River, we are carrying relatively low caseloads for what like our stateside counterparts are doing. It gives me that time to go and sit with a family and extend a home visit from an hour to 2 hours if that's what that family needs. We also do a lot of services that are culturally based. We're finding ways to reconnect families to culture, be it through our cultural life books, sitting down and working on those with a family, helping them explore their own story, doing our kinship, and actually our caregiver cafe on the first Friday of the month to just bring people back to establish a supportive relationship with social services as not, a scary place that's only where social workers are at to, do all these hard things, but a place to just stop by and get a donut and some resources and connect with another grandma or auntie or just relative foster caregiver, non-relative foster caregiver for a couple minutes. We also, this week, it's already this week, are doing our annual training and resource fair where we do 2 days to help families come into social services, knock out that required training within the community. It's not, these far or difficult to access resources. We're going to bring them in, we're going to bring them close, and we're going to give them culturally relevant trainings to really help connect them to the work that they're doing on that level. And so I think those are really where we get to stretch here as a sovereign nation and do things differently and take that time, but ultimately really center everything we do on building a trusting relationship with our families.
Thanks, Katie. I would add that, and it kind of goes along with what Katie was saying about relationship building. When I know that tribes have limited resources. I love to hear that Salt River has a smaller caseloads than other counterparts, like parts, because like that's amazing, because not every tribe is like that. And I know like a lot of tribes are really strapped for resources. And so like I was thinking back when we had some of the families that we had when I worked for my tribe, and we would have to get creative sometimes because we had limited staff. And so even though I was the director, I did a lot of, the hands-on work, meeting with families, because, we would have families that were all over. And so since I traveled a lot for meetings, I would ask caseworkers, do you have any visits that need to be done? And they would say, yeah, can you stop by and see this family? And, this is kind of what's going on. And, so we would have good communication that way. And so I would stop in and visit with the family. And I would try to make sure I had ample time because I didn't want to like rush things, but also being respectful of their time, and I think, one of the differences was like when I was in school, they had told us like, you don't, when you're going through training, a lot of times they're telling you like, you don't, accept things from the family, but that's not how we are as Native people. And so we would always try to take the family something, even if it's like we would get donated items. And so we would put little care packages together. And so we would try to take them, a little care package of household items. So, we had case aides that would put those little packages together. And so we would try to take something because like that's how we are as Native people. I think that there's a lot of tribes that have that same I guess value. And if they invited me to, have a cup of tea or whatever it was, a lot of times they would do that. And I think I don't know if they still teach that in school. It's been a kind of a while since I've been in school, but that's just not that's just, if we were to deny that, I feel like that would be offensive. So it's all about that relationship building. And like I said, take care of the families because they're the ones that they're taking care of the children. They're doing the hard work. And they're also going to be our best recruiters. And they might be, we might be able to develop them from, maybe they're doing relative or kinship care as a kinship care provider, but we can develop them into a fully licensed foster home. And they may, that might be something that they may be able and willing to do, if we're helping to meet those needs. And one of the other things I would also say about that is it takes a whole office to do that. As far as recruitment and retention, it's not just one person's job, it's the entire department. So I always, tell our staff that, people are coming in at, when they need help, and we should treat them with a lot of respect, and treat them as relatives that are coming for help. So to treat them like that, but I'll turn it over to Pamela.
Thank you. Number 5, what community support services should be available to kin families long after the agency has ended its involvement? Or the Norma Misty.
Yes, so one of the main challenges that we have here in Salt River is housing. That is our biggest challenge. So I think that's something that should be addressed across the board. The majority of our families have these struggles, not only for financial reasons, but because maybe their house is too small, there's too many kids in the home. And one thing that we strive for is to keep sibling groups together. So we do ask our families that are getting receiving the children, we make so many accommodations. Sometimes the living room is the bedroom because we want to keep the kids together, right? I think that's something that families need after the agency is no longer involved, is that the GALs should continue to make regular visits, do check-ins, because when they're there in the home, they're able to identify or maybe see things that the family doesn't see, that are indicators of early behavioral concerns. So it's important that they remain in the home. Our families also have the option to come back to in-home services. After the case is closed, they can voluntarily come back. And lastly, I think we need to be able to support that connection between siblings that are separated or birth family members that are separated.
I would add, I know that a lot of times that once the case has closed, there's not a lot of support, and that support needs to continue. And I know like that's really difficult because I just know like a lot of tribes across Indian country, like we're struggling just to put out fires, right? And so a lot of times, once the case is closed, like we feel like our job is done. But that family is still going to need help and support, including cultural support. I've seen some tribes have a cultural support or resource worker that is a part of their department, and they can help with answering questions, helping to educate the family if needed, helping to educate the children if needed, helping to answer questions like, what do you do? How do we get the kids Indian name? What is an Indian name? Why is it important? Answering questions like that. Why is hair important? Answering questions like that, but also to help integrate kids back into their family, into their tribe. I've had families that say I was adopted years ago, and I want to need help finding my family, and so finding the resources with that. So I know that's something that some of the I've seen some tribes do, is they have like a cultural support resource worker that can maybe help with that. Unfortunately, those questions are always tough because like when I worked for my tribe, we didn't have the time or the energy to put towards that. Like I really wish we would. But having check-ins, I think the ladies here were talking about that, and having check-ins, after some time has passed, we should be checking in with the family every 6 months or every year or so, and helping to provide mental health support. I hear a lot of families talk about that, that, just because the case is closed, doesn't mean that the problems and issues aren't there. It may have closed with tribal customary adoption, guardianship, or adoption, but a lot of times those issues are going to they may surface after the case is closed. And so then the family is like, now what do we do? Where do we go for help and support? So I think that's really important, that resources continue. There is actually a post-adoption center, and there's also was it post-adoption for mental health? I'm trying to remember the official name of it, but there are a couple of new centers that have opened about the same time that the National Center for Diligent Recruitment opened. Those are some more additional resources that are out there for tribes. They have the same goals as us in providing help and support to states, tribes, and territories.
Thank you. Question 6. What are some of the most significant differences in support needed by relative kinship families versus non-relative, more traditional foster families? Katie and then Misty.
Yeah, so significant differences really, I mean, off the bat, what we look at is that our kinship families are just receiving these children with no prep, right? Our non-relative foster families, they've had potentially, here in Salt River, certainly with our formalized foster care program, they've had 10 weeks, 3 months, 6 months of training and prep and working and questions and preparation. When our kinship families, they're getting a phone call and saying, hey, do you have room for 2, 3, 7 kids? That's a huge difference, right? Our foster families our non-relative families, they set the number of children that they're, hey, we can be open to 2, we're only going to take girls. So our kinship families come with very little prep and sometimes huge sibling groups. They don't want to say, oh, well, I'm only going to take half of my grandchildren. So those are really big differences that are going to need a lot of support and understanding. Again, we go back to that relationship building. My first visits, usually after I get those background checks, are about, well, okay, what resources do we need right now to stabilize what we're doing? And then after that, one of the other major differences that we look at, and it goes back to that kind of prep stuff, is that our kinship families don't often have a strong understanding of the impact of this trauma and the consequences of this. They're like, oh, well, these are my nieces and nephews. I know them. I have this relationship. I don't know why they're continuing to have these problems, or these are my grandchildren, and that parenting needs to be different, that the understanding that just the removal constitutes the trauma. Maybe they're even being removed, but staying in the home they've been in with grandparents, and the parents are leaving. But that's still a trauma, and it's going to have these consequences on behaviors, and our families aren't always super prepared for that. So we spend a lot of time talking about, hey, just loving them is not going to be enough. There's going to have to be some changes in how we're parenting or how we're addressing these things. So, on one hand, we have this understanding is really different, and the prep work is, and then the logistics on the other side, the straight logistics of, I wasn't prepared to have 3 or 4 additional children in my home. I don't have a car for that. I don't have, how am I going to get them all to school? So that is really, part of what we do is let's hammer out these logistics before we tackle your training. We have to balance all of that. And it all ultimately comes back to the relationship we're able to build with the family.
Thanks, Katie. I agree with all of that. And I think a lot of times parents aren't prepared to deal with the consequences of trauma, right? Like there's so much trauma that has happened and disruption. And maybe they saw this coming, maybe they didn't. There's and there's so much going on at that time. The kids have needs. the biological parents have needs. And, then, you have all these, especially if you have large sibling groups like that, which, we have Native families that have large families. And so, I mean, that's a lot of kids to care for. And trauma affects everybody differently. And at first they may seem like they're okay. And then after they get comfortable a little bit, then those behaviors start coming about and start surfacing. So then, we've got a whole nother set of issues that we have to deal with. And depending on how old the kids are and where they're at developmentally, do they have, are we meeting their physical needs, their physical health needs, their mental health needs? And then, a lot of times, and then if we have other children in the household, we want to make sure we're keeping everybody safe. And there's just so much that can be going on. And like I was talking about before with families, they boss or the relative or kinship care placement may have their own thoughts and feelings about, frustrations with the parents and, what, and why, how and why the kids came into the situation, the family came into the situation that they were in. And, they're going to have their own feelings and processing those things. So the family needs a lot of help and support. And, and one of the things too, and I know we haven't really touched on this and talking about this, but, I want to make sure that people know too, and this is kind of off topic a little bit, is that, tribes do really, really well with, with our number of kinship and relative placements. I know like when I was doing this work for my tribe, we were at somewhere around 80% of our total placements were with relative or kinship care providers. That was one of the areas that we excelled in, in comparison with our state counterparts. And so I wanted to be able to provide, numbers in terms of that and and just demonstrating that, this is something that I feel like this is a strength for our tribal, the tribes, our tribal communities. And so anyway, just wanted to mention that real quick. I know we wanted to leave time for question and answer. So I don't know if any questions have come in.
Well, I was going to ask you guys, put you on the spot. I have one that somebody had sent in with their registration. Sorry, I know you girls can answer this. Because our audience is a mix of tribal communities and stateside. So, and I think this is applicable across the board. But when you start to work with kinship caregivers who may have had bad experiences with the child welfare system, what are some, maybe just a couple brief tips on building trust with those families? Anybody want to start? Katie?
Oh, yeah.
And then we'll go to Norma, and
Yeah.
there you go.
So I think, building trust is right away acknowledging, having that conversation and sitting and listening to making that time, focusing on centering on the relationship so that I'm not just coming in and being like, okay, yeah, I know you've had all this, here's your paperwork, sign this. It's sitting there, listening to the grievance, even if you're like, no, everything went well. Like you sit, you listen, you acknowledge, you share about really clearly about what this process looks like. Usually I have found even when there's a removal, there's kids already in the home, or we're getting a new referral for a potential family. Nobody has actually sat down and explained this process. Nobody has sat down and said, here's step one, and this is why we do step one. Here's step two, and this is why we do step two. So by making space and having a lot of time for that conversation and acknowledging either their bad experience, for myself as a non-tribal member, as a representative of a tribal government, I will acknowledge that, like, hey, I understand, here's, a non-native person coming into your home telling you how to parent. We acknowledge that, we cover that right away so that it's, and usually, we try to insert a little humor if the family's ready for that, and it kind of can break that tension and create space to build trust, and then following up on whatever it is I say I'm going to do. I tend to give wider timelines and say, okay, I'm not going to call you tomorrow, but by the end of the week. And then making sure that I do that helps with those things.
Thank you, Norma. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Well done, Katie. I would just like to say that as a worker, as a social worker, transparency is vital. You've got to be genuine. If you're coming in with a very tenacious, I'm going to get this done, we're going to do this, and you're not inclusive of that family, and you don't let them share their story, you're going to hit brick walls. So traditionally Native Americans are they're storytellers. They want you to hear them, and chances are that nobody else has heard them. So you need to, give yourself enough time and enough of a relationship where they can trust you and they can share with you.
Awesome. Misty, do you have anything you want to add real quick before we wrap up? You're good? Okay. Thank you. That was so helpful and informative. We're going to do a quick wrap up. We'll go back to the PowerPoint. We're going to take a quick look at some key takeaways from today's presentation that we can all use to develop strategies for supporting kinship care in our own jurisdictions. One key lesson we can learn from tribal communities is their willingness and ability to provide financial support to meet the needs of their families. This approach shows a deep understanding of the practical challenges families face, and it reinforces the importance of ensuring families have what they need to care for their children. As agencies, we need to think creatively about how we can mirror this level of support. One effective strategy is to reprioritize our resources to address the unique needs of kinship families. By reallocating funds or adjusting our support structures, we can ensure that kinship families, who often step in during a time of crisis, have the financial stability they need to thrive. Ultimately, this will strengthen both the families and the children in their care. Next slide, please. Tribal communities have long demonstrated creativity and adaptability in addressing trauma, particularly when it comes to supporting families. They use tailored strategies that meet the unique needs of their families, recognizing that a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. This emphasis on understanding and addressing trauma is key to strengthening families and their capacity to heal. When we look at how we approach trauma training for kinship families, we should take a page from this book. It is important to consider the families we're working with and customize training to be culturally sensitive and relevant to their specific experiences. By doing this, we honor their backgrounds, we strengthen their ability to cope with trauma, and ultimately provide more meaningful support. Next slide, please. One of the key strengths we see in many tribal communities is a deep sense of connection and mutual support. This isn't just a cultural value. It's rooted in generations of social practice where the community stands as the backbone of individual and collective resilience. As we think about ways to build resilience and stability for families, especially those involved in the child welfare system, we can learn a lot from this model. A powerful strategy we recommend is intentionally creating spaces for families to gather and form their own communities of support. These networks are more than just a resource. They become lifelines of stability, trust, and encouragement during challenging times. By fostering these connections, we help families strengthen their resilience, and that has a lasting impact on both the children and the community as a whole. Next slide, please. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you take the opportunity to visit us at the National Center for Diligent Recruitment. Our website is diligentrecruitment.org. There you will find a knowledge hub with information, tools, and resources. Click on the Technical Assistance tab to request information on free technical assistance. And also don't forget to sign up for updates to your inbox. Remember that you will be receiving a survey after the webinar. Please fill that out. We value your feedback, and you will receive the slides and in a few days your certificate of attendance and the link to the recorded webinar. We welcome our panel. Really appreciate the time and energy that you contributed to this webinar to make it a success, and thank all of you for attending.